Yvonne asked me to come and talk about Islam in the Netherlands, and I have actually never officially studied anything about Islam in the Netherlands, but I'm training a lot of future leaders of Islamic capacities who will become imams in the prison, or imams in hospitals, chaplains, or imams in mosques. And I work in the Netherlands, and I'm Dutch, and I'm completely stunned by what is happening in the Netherlands. And that is what moves me to keep reading the newspapers and keep trying to understand what on earth is happening in my country. What has come into the people that collectively they are all in a panic? You know, in Indonesia, we feel everybody's in a moral panic, like, oh my God, the West is coming in and everybody's going to wear mini skirts. And in the Netherlands, they're in, you know, Islam panic, and I don't even know what they're panicked about. And so for today, I try to trace back for you what is happening and what we're seeing in the Netherlands. So let me see now. Because one of the big issues is who is Dutch? What is it to be Dutch? And I think that is part of the core issues, that people are forgetting what is the essence of Dutchness. And you know, everybody talks about foreigners, which they call, they talk about allochtone and autochtone. They even invented two words to speak about local and immigrant populations. But, you know, they only have a certain type of immigrant in mind, because our crown prince, as you might know, is married to someone who is from South America. And his father was German, and his grandfather was German. So we have a long history of immigration and adopting foreigners in all kinds of ways. And, you know, his grandfather being German, Second World War, should I say more? So that was very problematic, but everybody's forgotten about that. And so the mayor of Rotterdam, the second largest city in the Netherlands, is called Abu Talib, and he's called a burgemeester, and he is a first generation Muslim immigrant. And he has risen to this position. He's very well liked, but of course he's not the Muslims that everybody's afraid of or talking about. And so I started this basically also when Professor Haddad and I were discussing what to do for today, with the trial and acquittal of Geert Wilders, because it is really Geert Wilders, everybody knows who that is, you all remember him, who has brought this to the fore, this incredible Islamophobia in the Netherlands. And then his trial was received worldwide attention, but he received most attention because he made this movie called Fitna, which is just an incredible bad product of cinematography as far as I can see it. But it was a huge hype in the Netherlands, and he was going to say the last and final word about Islam. And then, of course, it fell flat, because when people watched Fitna, nobody knew what exactly he was trying to say, and everybody actually thought it was nonsense. But that's another story. But so what was the issue? That he was accused of engaging in anti-hate speech, and that he was breaking laws of the Netherlands, and that he was breaking the International Code of Human Rights. So his case, as we see it, including, you know, the movie Fitna, was seen as a violation, as a direct violation of print, speech, and film. And what actually was at stake was the whole issue of freedom of speech. I put this in here, but I don't have time to show it now, because these are the links that lead to the trial. I'm not sure if we're going to share this PowerPoint, but if you would like to see the trial, you just click on the first link and it comes up in Dutch. And what is very interesting is that what you see in Dutch looks remarkably similar to what, for example, he said during a speech in a church in Tennessee. Anyway, the Wilders phenomenon, first of all, as we all know, he was acquitted. He was acquitted of all charges, and again, it was about the freedom of speech. What are the limits of freedom of speech in the Netherlands? That was the question. In the same time that this trial took place, he was elected. He was elected to parliament. He had an average of 1.5 million voters, and he won 23 of the 150 seats in parliament on June 9th, 2010. And so what is his platform? I have a student, an MA student in the Netherlands, who wrote a thesis about the discourse of Wilders. And apart from her theories about discourse, and Foucault and others that have talked about discourse, she has listed what does he talk about. Basically, if you look at the list of 20 points, it's Islam, 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 in different variations. First of all, his point is it did not go through an enlightenment. It is a totalitarian ideology. It is violent, by which he refers to Moroccan youth that have a very high incidence of violence and arrest in the Netherlands compared to youth from other groups. And basically his conclusion is Islam is not compatible with Western lifestyles, by which he means the Dutch lifestyle. The lifestyle, or the, oops, what's happening now? Start later, thank you. How do we do that? Okay, restart later. This thing has a life of its own and a mind as well. Anyway, so this is basically, if you look at all his points that he brings up, this is what his discourse comes down to, and which then constitutes his political platform. Of course, looking from abroad and afar, I think, wait a minute, the Netherlands has, just like we have economic crisis, we have all kinds of other huge issues and problems. However, this is what this man focuses on. And obviously, a lot of people agree with him because they vote for him. So he must be expressing a sentiment that lives among a part of the population. So one of the questions is, where does this sentiment come from? And one of the issues that he brings up is it comes from a gap between the citizens and the government. There is a gap between the leaders who are all highly trained, have university degrees, and do not listen to or understand the real burgher, the person who, earns his living by working with his hands and tilling the land and basically reorganizing the Netherlands, because this is what we Dutch do all the time. Everybody's constantly reorganizing. When I was a student, I got just mad. My friends drove me mad because every time they were repainting their room or reorganizing the furniture or making new furniture. That's typically Dutch. That is, people working with their hands, and all these highly trained Leiden University graduates who rule us don't know what we are about. Never mind, he was from the same, he's from the same order, highly trained university. That is something aside. Also, when you hear him speak, by the way, that's something that people forget. In Holland, you can hear very much where someone comes from and what part of the almost caste system he or she is from, by the way they speak. And he speaks a very southern dialect, which makes him sound, folksy. And he comes from a rural, someone who knows the clay. Of course, nobody in the Netherlands knows the clay anymore, but that's not an issue. Because there's hardly clay left in the Netherlands. Remember, it's so densely populated that everything is built on. Then he says that these leaders in government, they ruled or they decided about Islam from a point of view of cultural relativism. They thought that, everything should be possible, everybody should fit into Dutch society, and they never insisted on immigrants showing or giving proof of the fact that they had a strong Dutch identity. Then the other issue that he constantly hammers on is freedom of expression, because he feels that, And that is why this became a case in court. He wanted to have a case in court because he feels that it is the Muslims who threaten the true freedom of expression in the Netherlands, and he is against dual nationality, so I'm in trouble too. So now, what kind of guest workers is he thinking about? What kind of people is he thinking about? He's really thinking about the guest workers who came during the 60s and the 70s to the Netherlands and who did not really have a high level of education. Basically, many were illiterate. And by the 1990s, especially the first generation, was so behind in Dutch society that it was about only 40% of that group that could find jobs and work. So 60% did not have, was out of work. Yeah?
Did they come from one particular country or?
Yeah, I'm going to tell you that too. But the majority who came as guest workers came from Turkey and Morocco. But we also, at that time, had a lot of people from Spain, from Italy, from Portugal, but they went back. So the expectation was that the people from Morocco and Turkey would go back as well. And so a lot of the first generation, and in part the second generation, more or less withdrew from society. And that is possible in the so-called pillar system in the Netherlands. They just had their own groups, their own schools, their own cafes, and so on and so on. I'm coming back to the pillar system in a second. And then there was the second generation who was in between societies. Their parents didn't want them to go to school, didn't want them to go to the Dutch schools, wanted them to go only to the Arabic or the Turkish schools. So they kind of fell in between all the groups in society, and they are the group that now has trouble adapting to society. And they are now, pushing 30, maybe even 40. That second generation is getting older, and they are the ones to whom the person who murdered Van Gogh, the famous movie maker Van Gogh, he was murdered by someone from that generation. Okay, so when we look at the Dutch side, what are some of the explanations? We see that, it was mostly the ones ruling in the Netherlands in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s was mostly a left progressive elite who ignored the plight of the foreigners simply because they thought that the Dutch system would take care of them. They also felt that everybody should have their own cultural identity. So they refused to interfere with cultural groups, and they actually strengthened the identity of groups. And they never required that people would learn the Dutch language or that they would somehow show signs of wanting to adapt to the Dutch circumstances. They were also very anti-religious, and they still are. And that is one of the issues that we see in the Netherlands. That's very important, this anti-religious sentiment. When I really want to shock someone, I tell them I'm a practicing Christian. That is very shocking. I mean, if I go naked on the street, that's less shocking than saying I sometimes regularly go to church and pray, because there is this idea that religion, especially organized religion, is bad for society, bad for you. Nowadays, a lot of people have their own spirituality, which is called the little bit of something, ietsism, they call it in Dutch, a little bit of something and anything, which you create yourself, you cobble together a little Buddhism, a little Hinduism, but that's you who make that, right? And you don't want anything organized in there. They're also very anti-tradition and anti-historical, and especially up to about 10 years ago. Dutch tradition didn't matter. Everything that was traditional, oh my God, I get still a headache if I think of the beautiful armoires that were hacked into firewood and replaced by something ugly and square, because that was modern. There was no sense, this is our tradition, this is our history, we should conserve that, and also the teaching of history. But what instead became important during the 60s, 70s, 80s was a radical sense of subjectivity. I make my own world. And so this preaching of so you have people who used to preach this unclear, weak, flexible Dutch culture, whatever that was. And I tell you, when as a Dutch person you go abroad, is any of us Dutch here? You are Dutch? When they ask you to sing a song, what on earth do you sing? When they ask you to cook a Dutch meal, what do you cook? You have 3 meals to choose from, and the rest is Indonesian, because we like that better, right? And so this cultural relativism led to kind of a failed multiculturalism, because multicultural society should really be grounded in identity, in strong identities that can exchange with each other. And so then again they were accused of not hearing the voice of the people, and as a result what came up was a kind of a vacuum that consisted of very much, who are we? Are we losing our identity, or have we lost it already? And who are these strangers threatening our identity? And sorry, I put this all up. I know in Japan these days it's frowned at to put up PowerPoints with lots of language. So what do you have? If you think, everybody says, when I talk to them, oh, but the Dutch are so tolerant, the Netherlands are so tolerant. What does that mean? Well, when you look at the history of that tolerance, where did it come from? It had to do with trade. We allowed the Jewish refugees to come in and the Huguenots because it strengthened our trades, right? Our trade connections. So from the 16th, 17th century, we have indeed this long tradition of receiving groups because we think it made us stronger. And we did not want to interrupt connections with other countries. And then we would think there is this Dutch system, which I call Dutch care, which technically takes care of everybody. Whether you're legal or illegal, you used to be taken care of from the day of that you were born to the day you would die. You would get full health insurance, free schooling. If you had children, you get some kind of an extra amount for the children every 3 months to buy them clothes, and so on and so on. If you don't have a job, you would get social security, and sometimes that could be for 30 years. And there was a time even in the 80s that if you could convince your caseworker you needed, for example, horse riding lessons to get ready for a new job, you would get them. So it was really a crazy sugar pot. It was a honey pot. And of course people quickly figure that out, and you always have people who can make use of it and abuse it. Hey, there he goes again. Restart later, right? Didn't I have to say that? Yeah. Restart later. Why does he want to keep restarting?
Press on the other side.
Press on the other side? Yeah, thank you. Okay. Anyway, but then also the Dutch want to be independent. They, like I said, this reflexivity. They all want to be, I can decide, I'm special, but they want to be independent in community. And I just spent the last 2 days laughing my head off by reading a book written by a Belgian writer who used to live in the Netherlands, writing about his impressions about the Netherlands, and I hope I'm not insulting the other Dutch person in the room, but when the color of cream is in, everybody will come out in cream-colored suits, being extremely individualistic and independent, but all dressed in the same color. So it's very close to, Mao China, but independent. There's something very strange going on that has this community where nobody could stand out. Act normally, then you act strangely enough. That is strange enough. That's a Dutch saying. And so you see, that is being threatened by these people who are different. People in veils who say, I'm a Muslim, I'm standing for my Muslim rights, I'm going to the mosque to pray. So they somehow insult a lot of Dutch sensitivities. And then the Dutch is a very hierarchical society. It used to be hierarchies of birth. You had the Burgermeister, and you had the medical doctor, and you had the parliament and the priest, and. Now the hierarchy has become a hierarchy of education. The top has university, but by the year you're 12, you very much are put on a path of a certain certain training, whether you become a car mechanic or you go on the training to go to university. Once you're on that path, you get, for example, vocational training. Once you get vocational training, you don't get courses that discuss, philosophy or somehow how is our world put together. What do we do when we are an intercultural or a multicultural society? Then you just train to be a car mechanic, you see? So you lose a huge part of the population in that system, and that part of the population is the part that directly competes with the lowly trained guest workers. And that is the part of the population that also imagines things about Islam. And a large part of that population has voted for someone like Wilders, because they imagine, and I know I come from a tiny village in the Netherlands, and whenever I come back into that village, I hear the most awful things, and whatever I say, I'm stupid, they know better. And they have invented Islam, and they have made Islam into their own liking. They pick up here, there from the newspaper, they see something on TV, they see something with a burqa, and they know enough. And so then Wilders comes and expresses exactly what they have observed. You see? And you can, as a professor, you can go on and on. I'm just a professor. Who cares about me? I know, and also, I'm from the university, so I don't know anything. You see? So this is what we are seeing as well. We're seeing a sort of lower class, and because there is this direct competition for jobs, for resources, but also that is also the class that many times directly is in contact with Muslims, yet there is this almost segregation at certain levels. When you go up higher levels, people are more open, people want to know more, they want to learn, they talk, they discuss, but you don't see that at that level. So we see, so by the 60s, we see this disappearance of the influence of religion. We see these socially progressive ideas coming up. We see this financial security. So the Dutch felt they had a mission to the world and called themselves Gidsland, which means a land of guidance to the world. They were going to guide the world in their social experiments like acceptance of drugs, acceptance of abortion, homosexual rights. That was really the mindset of the 60s. So here were the immigrants and refugees in the Netherlands, so they also were like a sort of mission, a new type of mission area for this new idea of the shining example of the Netherlands for the world. And of course what comes up then is the idea, how on earth can you not love this? How on earth can you not appreciate this? This is marvelous to be part of. And so the guidance to the world abruptly ended around the year 2002. And this was, as we know, Van Gogh was still alive then, but it was, the World Trade Center, and basically financial problems started, and the role of the government had changed, and they had to also, instead of taking care of the whole population, they had to start cutting. They had to start cutting into the system, they had to start dividing the means, and there was just less to go around. Also, what they did, they gave the responsibility for the multicultural living together to local governments and to local communities. They said, because another thing that people forget is that in a place like the Netherlands, everything is decided on the top. That means 5 civil servants who know nothing about the topic might decide on your behalf. And I can give awful examples and interesting examples and good examples about that. And that then is made into a policy. And once the policy is brought into action, you have forms printed for the policy. When there's a form, it exists. When there's no form, it doesn't exist. Don't forget that. And so once the decisions from the top stopped, and it had to go to the communities. So that means there's another vacuum where the government could have made changes. They didn't quite do that to the detriment of the relations, because then you have these local governments who were prepared or not prepared to have to deal with issues on the mosques, issues about what happens to their societies, Muslim societies, and so on. Okay. I have to still going on, I'm sorry, because you wonder where on earth is the church and the religious institutions in all that. Well, the church has become, in this secularized society, the church has become really irrelevant. Basically should be silent and disappear to the background. And so there is also a very great inconsistency in what are the rules, what are the expectations of the new burghers. The government is not clear in its ideas, and as I say, it is a kind of a taboo to speak about religions, and that is what the Belgium Observer calls. He calls that dwanggedachte. The dwanggedachte is just an idea that just obsesses everybody. So if it becomes taboo to speak about religion, everybody will stop speaking about religion openly, or speaking about their own religious feelings openly, and so everybody will be, conforming to that idea that takes hold of society very much to the cream-colored clothing. All right, so Wilders then says, based on that, there shouldn't be any role for religion, and by the way, Islam is not a religion. And then another thing, Muslims should choose between integration or repatriation. And in the process of integration, there is no role for religion. So the most important element of the identity of someone who's Muslim has to be ignored if you want to integrate in Dutch society. So you see there is lots of room for incredible clashes. By the time I realize I don't have a watch, does anybody know the time or can tell me what time it is? Oh, so we still have at least 20 minutes to, yeah? So now we come to becoming a Dutch citizen. Okay, this is the hallmark of being a Dutch citizen. What is it? Riding a bike, right. You ride a bike in, I think this is Amsterdam, I'm not sure. Do you recognize where this picture is taking? It's on a canal, on a bridge, so it's probably bound to be Amsterdam. So now, if we look at the demographics, to come back to your question, we have around 16.7 million inhabitants. 3.4 million are immigrants. 1.5 from Western countries. 1.9 from other regions. So, in the Netherlands, 80% is Dutch. 5% comes from other European countries. 2.4% are Indonesian immigrants, many of whom were Muslims who came at the time of independence of Indonesia in 1948. 2.2% are Turkish, 2% Moroccan, 2% Surinamese. Because Suriname, when that became an independent country, lost about half of its population to the Netherlands. They all moved to the Netherlands. And a great part of that population was Muslim as well. And then the Netherlands, Antilles, and Aruba. So now in numbers, we see that we have 378,000 Turkish, 341,000 Moroccans, 262 Surinamese and Antillians, 614 other non-Western regions. So you see that Turkish and Moroccans are balanced with a lot of other people from other non-Western countries. Muslims are around 900,000, according to the latest counts. Hindus, 130, Buddhists, 160,000, and there's non-Western Christians of over 700,000, because that's what a lot of people forget, that many countries especially where refugee countries that somehow produce refugees, that many of those refugees are Christians. They are not all Muslims. And nobody ever talks about them, and nobody ever really knows where they are. Let's see. We really don't want to lose this. Oh, now it wants to go on the other side. Anyway, so and then if we look at more numbers, in 2003, we had 453 mosques, and 206 of those were Turkish. And you see 1 Bosnian, 1 Somalian, 2 Indonesian, 141 other. So there's quite a lot of mosques that maybe are without a certain ethnic identity, or they might be Dutch for all we know, because the thing is, what we didn't see in this picture yet is how the percentage of Dutch converts in the Muslim population. We also have quite a few people who converted, especially in intermarriage situations. Yvonne, I can send you this, so yeah. Now, how are the different religious groups in Holland being governed? Basically, we used to have the pillar system, and this is based on the time after we killed each other as Protestants and Catholics, because that's how we started out. And growing up in a very conservative Protestant family, the enemy were the Catholics on the other side of the river. So that is not that long ago. I mean, the Muslims hadn't become visible yet. So the way the Dutch government solved that issue was by creating pillars. The Catholic had their own pillar, the Reformed, the Re-Reformed, and then later on, Socialist, Humanist, Muslims. Now, and these pillars go very deep. Most of the time you can see them in caregiving, like the Catholic hospital, the Protestant hospital, and of course you have a lot of state facilities as well that override all this. Education, you have all kinds of flavors of Protestant education. You have two large Protestant universities, one in Kampen and one in Amsterdam. And the one in Kampen became so obsolete that they just merged this month with Amsterdam. And then we talk about difference between re-reformed, reformed, and other kind of subtle differences in being reformed. And you see it in the TV, in the media, in the radio, the TV, there's the Catholic channel, and now the Muslims, based on Muslim population, get their Muslim hours on TV, and so on and so on. But in the old days, you had your Catholic biking clubs, your Catholic choirs, Protestant rabbit breeding organizations. You just never had to see someone else of another denomination, ever, if you did not want to. And so, in a way, that was also one part of the thinking. Muslims would just have their own pillar and happily live alongside their other pillars, you see? But by the 60s, of course, everybody forgot that one day those pillars would become slightly obsolete because people wouldn't be so much religiously connected any longer. But that means that what do you do when you want to have an Islamic presence and you want to be paid for what you do? You set up an organization. Because that is being accepted in the pillar system. A mosque is not, a church is not, a synagogue is not, but an organization is. And so you have 1,125 Turkish organizations, of which 356 are Islamic. So I'm not sure, it's like someone does the math for me. It is how many people each organization can hold. When you have almost 400,000 Turkish inhabitants. So 681 Moroccan, 881 Surinamese organizations, and of which some are Islamic and some are not. And so this is something, is from the WikiLeaks. I get this from the WikiLeaks, coming back to when I say there is this gap between the rulers and what they expect. And there is this almost still existing class system which has become invisible in the Netherlands and society. This was an observation from an American diplomat in the Netherlands about some of the Dutch parliament, members of parliament, visiting a mosque in Amsterdam just before the elections for the local government. And it says, astonishingly, when lunch was served, at the end of the meeting, the political representatives sat down together at a table in the corner instead of distributing themselves around the room to continue a dialogue with their audience. So there is this, again, this is how you see the differences in Dutch society. I hope I'm not insulting you. Because, between okay, these are just, maybe they don't have my education, and I've talked to them, I talked to them now, and now I can just sit at my own table with my own. It's really us and them thinking, very much. Now, the Muslim population is represented by several organizations. The Turkish official state organization of Diyanet, and then we have Milli Görüş. And the Moroccan organization is called Uman, which means it's an umbrella organization. And the problem is that they have very many loose structures, but very few influential leaders. They have very few influential spokespeople. They have basically nobody who can stand up and speak against someone like Geert Wilders. Nobody who's at that level yet. And so it's a problem of representation. You have all these umbrella organizations, you know, doing all kinds of things and not speaking with one voice. And as a result, also many Muslims feel alienated in the Netherlands, especially Muslims who have, you know, somehow become more immersed inside the Dutch system, who've done, who've gone to Dutch schools, have all kinds of levels of graduate education. They also feel alienated because they go to organizations and mosques where people quibble about things that they don't feel connected to, that they don't have anything at stake in those quarrels, if I may say so. So what we have also is that the leadership of the mosque doesn't quite understand, in many cases, the Dutch environment and preaches against the Dutch environment, while people who want to be in the mosque, especially people who have a higher education and want to remain faithful Muslims, don't understand what they're talking about. A whole sermon going on about wearing earrings, you know, there's more important things. I mean, there is this, I don't know, Yvonne, if you saw the French dissertation that was written in the Netherlands based on research in mosques in Amsterdam, that you know, and he gives examples of the sermons, and it is all about futile issues, like can you pierce ears or not? No, because that will lead to wearing earrings, and you know, and that will lead to, you know, debauchery within Dutch society. And so they just don't feel. So you see there's alienation on many levels, also within the communities. There is great levels of alienation. And when I speak to my students who are Islamic, and they often cannot connect with with much of what's happening within the mosques. For example, there is a mosque in Amsterdam. It was built by a community from Suriname together with Pakistan. So the Suriname and the Pakistan community got together, built this huge mosque. It has no section for women. A mosque built in Amsterdam opened in the 2000s. No section, no place anywhere for women. It is absolutely shocking. But, you know, nobody thought about it. And so most of my female friends who are Muslims say, what am I going to do in a mosque like that? I don't belong there. It didn't count me in when they built the structure. So, as a result, according to the latest polls, half of the Muslim population in the Netherlands has stopped attending mosques regularly. And another finding in the latest polls was that the population does not grow as fast as people thought it was growing, because very many of the demographic trends we see in the Dutch population happen within the Dutch community, happen within the Muslim community. People marry much later, don't marry at all, don't want children, and so on and so on. So also among a segment of the Muslim population, the birth rate has become negative, as it is in the Dutch population. So what is the fear now? As I explained to you, it's economic. Like, oh, he's taking my job, he's taking my social security, right? It is freedom. Freedom of what? Freedom to be homosexual, have homosexual parades, speak about homosexuality, and be atheist. It is, of course, the murder of Van Gogh, the violence we see in the Muslim world. It's the imams who don't know Dutch, nobody knows what they're saying. and it's the burqa. God knows who's inside that, that kind of cover. It's the competition for resources, and there is no consensus concerning values and norms any longer in the Netherlands. And that is what really prevents a social cohesion. There is no, for example, group that Muslims could connect with and say, okay, we have the same pattern of thinking about homosexuality. We do have them, we have a lot of Christians who have the same idea about homosexuality as certain segments of the Muslim population. However, they don't connect. They don't link up. There it is again. What is this restart later thing, Adam? So what do we do then is that the Muslim population, especially the educated part, is focusing specially about these issues that basically when you talk about Islam, about being a Muslim, about the world of Islam, are minor issues. I mean, we're looking at the whole, spectrum of challenges that face the population. They also focus on these smaller issues that are enlarged in the Netherlands, and one of them is the burqa. Because just now, October 7th, there was a very large anti-burqa demonstration and a pro-burqa demonstration in Amsterdam. This is made by the Anissa Organization of Muslim Women, one of the umbrella organizations in the Netherlands, and they looked at what is the burqa really about. There's fear, but what about the self-determination and the freedom of religion? And so this is what came out, and these posters, they spread all over the Netherlands, and this is what came out during the demonstration, where they say, vote against the ban on the burqa, and then you can put in your petition at the website, and you see in the middle there is Wilders. There is Wilders, as indicated as the one who has brought up this discussion and enlarged it, and will keep it going, because I actually was part of the burqa committee of the Dutch government, and we met, I think 4 or 5 years ago, I can't even remember when, and we gave an advice. And then people were very happy with the advice. Basically, this was the advice. It will really, you will get a lot of court cases about freedom of religion. You will get a lot that you will have to answer about, plus, how many cases are we talking about? And so people counted, and we're like 100. And so this is the burqa, the pro-burqa demonstrators. They are using slogans that were used for the homes for abused women. Blijf van mijn lijf means keep your hands off my body. And then why are you taking away my choice? So they are using, Dutch arguments in this whole discourse. Okay. Here is again one of these pesky long pieces of text on a PowerPoint slide, because what this Wilders say in court this year in 2011, on June 1st, he said Islam is a threat to the Western norms and values, against the freedom of speech, equality between men and women, equality between hetero and homosexuals, equality between believers and unbelievers. We see how around the whole world, freedom has to flee when Islam comes near. Islam is opposite to freedom. And he says, I walk in a very long tradition that I want to honor. This is my battle, a battle for freedom that is much older than I am. And for this battle, many has given their life. So basically, he goes all the way back to the times of the Reformation, and he goes all the way back to the time of the Second World War and everybody who battled for freedom, right? And he says, we turn a blind eye to men beating their wives, and so on and so on. People isolating themselves, and people refusing to learn Dutch. And so we, at the same time, he talks about, oh, this is in Dutch, I'm sorry. While he talks about that, sorry about that, sometimes I forget what language something is in. He forgets that the way the Dutch society and government deals with Islam, especially with the Muslims that he is afraid of and that create fear, which are extremist Muslims, right? Like it did with drug dealers and drug users. Because we all know about the freedom of marijuana and things and soft drugs, right? Holland used to be very famous for that. Well, why was that freedom? So that you could keep an eye on everybody. And that's what it does. That's what the Dutch government is trying to do as well. They have caught a net over the Dutch Muslim community that they think are potentially dangerous, and they are watching them, and they have more information about the Muslim community than about any other community. And Muslims I meet are so tired of being interviewed and being the target of research. Everyone researching Muslims in the Netherlands goes to the same people, talks to the same people, and they're so, because there's only a handful to go around, because the rest is busy, living their life within Dutch society. Okay, what is it to be Dutch, right? What is the core of being Dutch? Have you woken up and thought about that? Well, like we create many of our existence, like the Dutch like to create much of their existence, we also create the core of being Dutch. Soccer games are the expression of being Dutch. First of all, you carry the Dutch colors, red, white, and blue of the Dutch flag, orange of the Dutch royal family. And then I'm not sure what you will do. You drink, you are loud, and you maybe create some havoc and destroy things where you are, but those are other stories, the famous Dutch rowdy fans. This is Dutch too. This is again from Anissa, who, what do you call it, action to show how Dutch they are. So they also, red, white, and blue, they're eating herring, and you eat the herring raw, and when you say, I eat them raw, or I like them raw, that goes two ways. You eat the herring raw, but you can also eat Wilders raw. You can take him raw. Yeah? And this is something I thought was interesting, because on the 4th of June, a lot of people still thought, this was just before the elections, that Wilders would just explode and go by himself. And this didn't happen. So a lot of the Dutch were also very surprised when he won. And then he got a tulip named after him, and look at the color of the tulip. So that's also part of becoming Dutch, having a tulip, and it is orange. So, but what is social reality? When we look at the expectations and the opinions of Muslims, the majority is quite happy in the Netherlands, the majority is quite integrated, and is quite well educated, and finds jobs. Especially starting with the second generation. They're also becoming more secularized than the parents, and they have adopted Dutch patterns of thinking. So what does Wilders want to become Dutch? And maybe you can add some to that. Well, many songs by Frans Bauer, who is a sugar-coated singer who sings Dutch songs. There's a lot of remembering of the disaster of 1953. I don't know if you noticed that. We had a big water, the dikes and dams in part of the Netherlands broke in a big a storm, and villages and towns in that part called Zeeland came underwater. There's a lot of novels and movies nowadays. I mean, comparatively speaking, because a lot in the Netherlands, it's a small place. It's maybe 2 or 3. there is a new respect for the Dutch flag, and there is a citizenship test. Can you speak Dutch? Do you know all the facts about Dutch history? And the language rules have become stricter. Now, when you have family reunion, the spouse, the incoming spouse, has to learn Dutch in the country from the original country before they come to the Netherlands. They have to do a test there. And the newest thing, I heard that just a week ago, is that old, empty, abandoned churches can no longer be sold to Muslim communities. So this is the revenge of Wilders, while reality continues. And as we say in the Netherlands, you always see in the Netherlands what the weather was the day before on the way the people dress today, because they're always behind. And I think that is what we also see with a lot of what's happening in the Dutch governance. They're kind of behind. The trends are speaking different numbers, different realities. And right now, by the way, nobody cares at this moment about Muslims any longer, or about Calvinists or Reformed, Re-Reformed, because we have the Greek crisis. Thank you.
Any questions? We have about 18 minutes before we have to get out of this room. Yes. You want
One
the
question?
questions, Lisa?
I want to...
Okay.
Yeah, sure. You were first.
Could you address the impact of gender on what I think is happening in the second generation of Muslims in the Netherlands is that the women are focused on being themselves, getting ahead within the Dutch society, whereas the young men are looking back toward the home country where their parents came from.
Right.
I think more than anything else, it's a matter of education and outlook and gender, rather
Right.
than sheer Dutchness and sheer otherness.
Right, right. No, I didn't want to, I couldn't bring up the role of gender because it's very complex. Because some of the most influential Muslims in the Netherlands, Muslim women, are converts. Ceylan, Bektaş, Weber, the ones who really set the trends were converts who married a Muslim, who have a Muslim spouse. And so, but also, if you look at the second and the third generation, and this again is the Dutch system. In the Dutch system, nobody can stop you if you want to go to school. First of all, your parents have to send you to a school to a certain age, but also, it's never a matter of money or an issue of money, because everything is for free. So whatever background you come from, you can go on and you can follow any educational track you want, and it is especially indeed the second and third generation of Muslim women who have really benefited from this. They went on and kept studying and studying. And so what you see indeed is, first of all, what you see is that a lot of them have married because their parents wanted, got a few kids, and are now divorced and want to stay unmarried. And then indeed, the divorced husband, who has not caught up as they have, will go back to Turkey or Morocco and get a new spouse there. While they often remain unmarried because they cannot go the way that they take a Dutch spouse who might not be Muslim, and they still want to be faithful to their religion. So that is indeed the ones, and as you saw on the flyer I showed of the Dutch woman with the herring, they are the ones who are really calling up a lot of the discussions that go against the discourse of Wilders. However, the problem is, of course, he's been chosen. So we have to wait. He's been elected. So we have to wait till the next round of elections to get rid of him. So and so that is the fear. The fear is that his discourse and his view can so skew the opinions that unless they really take hard stands and work very hard, 4 years might not be enough to turn around this way of thinking. Because it is really, as I say, it's about a very small segment of the population. Because, and people will also say, oh, but that this or that, he or she is not a real Muslim, That's not the Muslim I'm talking about when I say they don't want to be Dutch. so that is one of the issues. But yeah, it is the women who have a very great influence. And of course, then the third, fourth generation, they educate them, they raise them. They also write, what you see is a huge output of books, children's books. There's so many that there's also there's a dissertation written about them by Karen. What's her last name? No. Karen. I forgot her last name. It's not published, unfortunately, but she comes up with dozens of examples of books talking about children, Muslim children meeting Christian children, secular children, Jewish children, the other way around, and how they interact and what they teach each other and how they learn from each other. So that by itself also is going to change a lot. That we now are creating a lot of new types of material that in future will be used and also will change the mindset of this generation of Muslim children.
Is this material produced by Muslims?
She is a Muslim. She's a Muslim convert. Why can't I remember her last name? Yeah. You were first and then you, yeah?
My question, I guess, has to do with I suppose I ended up being a little confused on your take on how integrated the various Muslim communities are. And clearly it's going to be different, and there's a lot of variety within these communities. So on the one hand, you seem to be saying that in general they are actually integrated, largely speaking, but on the other hand, that there's a kind of a problem with integration as pointed or as indicated by that sort of pillars policy, which I find really interesting, because in a sense, that pillars policy seems to be doing exactly the wrong thing. I would guess, looking at it, I think that's your point. It seems to be that this is, if you want to integrate people precisely, you don't want to reinforce communalism, and you want to do things that are cross-cutting. So is there in fact something, what are the ways, I guess my big question, or one question is, what are the ways that sort of socially or at the governmental level or other ways, maybe at political party level, what are ways that Muslims in the Netherlands are in fact being integrated? Because clearly they are in various ways. So what are the things that do that? And is your overall take that yes, there is a kind of problem with integration, or is it no, this is an exaggerated problem as seen sort of by the British crowd?
My overall take is that there are two communities of Muslims. You have the Muslims that are integrating as we speak, or are integrated, like we just said, women, lots of the younger women of the second, third generation. And you have Muslims who are still staying away from Dutch society. They are not necessarily first generation. They're also second and third. So you have two groups. And it is the group that stays away that is causing all this, all these reactions. But like I say, that the people who are integrated, they're not considered Muslims any longer. They're considered Dutch, you see? So it is really, and part of the issue is the leadership, the imams. I couldn't go in, because I think we're going to talk about that in class, right, in your class. Yeah? Because the imams, there is a great lack of properly schooled imams and other leaders. And they used to be sent from the home countries, or they used to be shuttled in from Saudi Arabia or from Pakistan. And so they preach, they preach in Urdu, they preach in Arabic, they preach in Turkish. But then if the younger generation comes in, they can't understand them anymore. So that is a huge issue that I think several Muslim communities in the States are struggling with as well. So while the community is integrating and growing, you still have these leaders who find, somehow connect with people who are more of a more traditional mindset, or who have a stake at not integrating, who want to be, for example, you actually have the same in the immigration churches in the Netherlands. What you have there is that people who used to be, let's say, a synod leader in their own country, let's say Ghana or Nigeria. In the Netherlands, they don't speak Dutch. Suddenly they become irrelevant. Who takes over the governance of a church is a woman who was trained and educated in the Netherlands and speaks excellent Dutch. You see, just as someone like Ayaan Hirsi Ali could become the spokeswoman for Muslims in the Netherlands, although she did not represent anybody, I'm sorry to say that, but herself. You see, because her Dutch was impeccable, she learned it, she got with the program really fast, she figured it out really fast, she found the right friends and climbed up. And so you see, there's also this division within generations, within communities, and we cannot touch that. Communities have to solve that themselves. And that's why I'm saying a lot of the more higher educated Muslims just step away. They don't want to be part of those mosques anymore. And I wouldn't be surprised if one day they start to set up their own mosques or their own communities, you know, and they have their Sufi groups and they have the Quran studies that come together, but those are not official and they don't ask for subsidy to do that. They just do that by themselves. Yeah, so you see, it is a very complex picture. And if I try to explain that to the people in my village, they get dizzy and they don't want to hear about it. It's too complex. We know what we know and we see what we see. We see someone in a burqa on TV. So, let's see. You had a question, and was there anybody else I saw? You had a question. You were first, right?
I was wondering about the recent terrorist attacks a few months ago in the Netherlands.
Oh, that was not that recent. Van Gogh?
Yeah.
Yeah. That is being milked over and over again. Yeah. Oh.
Done, like, Islamophobic
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Even, like, in terms of young people that were, because it was
Yeah.
directed at young people, but I was just wondering in terms of their understanding of, like, his writings, at least, on the issue.
Well, the murder of Van Gogh was our 9/11. Was the 9/11 of the Netherlands. We knew 9/11, but we were not that worried. That's what I'm saying. In 2002, things started to change. You know, it really threw the spotlight on a small part of the Muslim community, young, disaffected men, who feel they don't belong in the Moroccan or the Islamic community any longer. The parents don't understand them. They don't understand their parents, and they are rejected by Dutch society. And so they found kind of a national, a global type of Islam that they could become part of. And we know that, we call him in Dutch Mohammed B, that he spent most of his days in the youth center, in the subsidized youth center, living on his social security, surfing the web and finding extremist groups and web pages. And so he felt that, you know, he had a mission on behalf of a certain part of the population. Yeah, but that was what exploded the population. And that's what made Wilders big as well. That's what made him really, really big. But as I say, it's almost like after the facts right now, because it was it 2004, the murder? I think it was in 2004. Does anybody remember the year? It's a while ago. And so by now, you know, things have changed. Things have changed. The government really has domesticated the generation of Mohammed B and everybody belonging to him. And everybody who even remotely looks dangerous is in jail or is in some kind of forced education program or being watched day and night. But that was really, that was the watershed moment in the Netherlands. And it was not just a murder, because Van Gogh, he insulted people like me as well. He was, I don't know if my the fellow Dutch person agrees, he was very, very insulting. He was very insulting, and he did things that really were borderline, you know, civilized.
He was asking for it.
Well, the thing is, I won't say he was asking for it, but the thing is that then how he was murdered, So a lot of people could identify with the fact that people would get angry with him, want to attack him. But then how he was murdered, he begged for his life, and the guy kept, stabbing him, and said, he had to be killed like an animal, and he slit his throat like you kill an animal, and that is what really was very much against the sensitivities of the population. You cannot murder someone in such a way, because others were murdered for their ideas. There was Pim Fortuyn. I don't know if you heard of him. He was one of these larger-than-life persons with very extreme thoughts. It's really Wilders is really the replacement of Pim Fortuyn, but Pim Fortuyn was much smarter because he was a professor of economics and he was very, very smart. But when he was murdered, we did not have this kind of reactions. And he was murdered as well for his way of thinking, you see? Yeah, so that was part of it. It's like, where do you cross the line even for a very tolerant or I don't care population? There's always a line you cross.
I was interested in surprised to hear that you said the Muslim Dutch population, or the general population, is a negative birth rate.
Part of it. The part of it that is becoming more integrated in Dutch society.
Some of the things I read and some of the things I hear, for instance, in Denmark, Copenhagen, half the babies are named Mohammed.
Mm-hmm.
And that
Yeah,
scares the hell out of people.
right.
The question is that the case also in the Netherlands, that so many that the birth rate is still much higher of the Muslim population than the Christian population? And second of all, we're in a global recession, basically. And we know what the job situation is in this country, and we know what the Euro situation is in Europe, and Greece, and Spain, and so on. Are there jobs for these people? Or are we looking for things to really change with people in the streets?
Right. Well, the birth rate is declining among people with higher educations. There are still first and some second generation immigrants who have a very high birth rate, and that has nothing to do with Christian. The birth rate of the Dutch is negative, whatever religion they are. So the birth rate that stands out is still from a certain generation. But since there is no new people, no new immigrants that are allowed in these days that look like that generation, in a few years that birth rate will become negative as well as their children grow up and become second and third generation. Finding jobs in the Netherlands is never easy. It's always difficult to find a permanent job, correct? Because to have a permanent job, once you have a permanent job, they cannot fire you. And so also Dutch young people who graduate from university have problems finding jobs, especially in these days during the recession. But the thing is, when you live in Europe, you can go anywhere. And I don't know if you heard the feature on NPR the other day, that Germany has hundreds of thousands of jobs that remain unfilled. Because their economy is growing, and so people can move. They can move and pick up something else. But then it is, of course, a matter of having a skill. So it is more of the people who can't find a job at all are the people who are totally unskilled, although they do the cleaning and the washing up for people. And then the other generation, but also my students, once they graduate, it takes a while before they find a job. They have to meander through society a bit. So that's very much like we have now in the United States.
We have time for half a question, because this room.
You have half a question?
Yeah, so I was wondering, you said that, it's a primarily secular society, but so when Muslims are being persecuted, do they find sort of solace or partnerships with other religious communities that have been sort of pushed to the side as well, or is there tension between those two?
Well, when I say it's a secular society, it means you don't talk about being religious. Actually, many people in the Netherlands still are quite religious, but it's spiritual, it's individual, or it's something they make themselves. They just don't want to be part of organized religion anymore, and they especially don't want to be told anymore what to believe and where to believe and how to believe. Yes, the churches have traditionally reached out to the Islamic groups. And because they are basically the Islamophobia has had as a consequence as well a great prejudice against churches, the organized churches, any organized religion, especially when they were open to interfaith dialogue with Muslims. So yes, Muslims and churches do link up. However, the question is, how much can they do together? Yeah, but they work together a lot. But then, as I say, the churches don't have a strong voice in society any longer, which is very strange because our former Prime Minister, Balkenende, he was one of the prime evangelical leaders that we had in the Netherlands. Wasn't he in charge of the evangelical radio channel, Balkenende, de evangelische omroep?
I've been away from
Oh, you were way too long. Okay. Yeah, he was in charge of that. Yet, as Prime Minister, he could not bring this up. He could not bring up anything defending Christianity, somehow, saying there's some good things there that we could learn. So he talked about values, that we all should behave more polite. Thank you.